The sound cut through the elegant charity gala like a gunshot. Slap! For a split second, the entire room froze. Crystal champagne glasses paused midway to lips. Conversations died mid-sentence. Even the string quartet seemed to miss a beat as hundreds of San Francisco's most powerful elite turned to stare at the impossible scene unfolding before them. Welcome, my beautiful family. With all my heart, I'm deeply grateful to each of you for watching. You're the reason these stories come alive. Every word I share is filled with passion and soul. Just for you. Hit subscribe to join me on a journey full of wonder and unforgettable tales. Your kindness and support lift my spirit beyond words. Blessings to you, my cherished friends. Now let's dive in. Amaya Bridges, tech millionaire Walter Webster's untouchable wife, the woman who controlled the city's social hierarchy with an iron fist, stood there, her perfectly manicured hand pressed against her reddening cheek, her mouth hanging open in complete disbelief. Standing opposite her was Zanaya Wong, a young public relations professional whose hand was still raised from the strike that had just shattered every unwritten rule of high society. The silence stretched like a rubber band about to snap. Then came the gasps, the whispers, the frantic pulling out of phones to capture what would become the scandal of the decade. Did she just... Oh my God, did you see? Someone actually hit Amaya Bridges? Security moved in swiftly, but the damage was done. In front of San Francisco's most influential power brokers, the Queen Bee had been publicly humiliated by someone who wasn't even supposed to be there. But here's what nobody in that glittering ballroom could have predicted. Here's what the media missed when they labeled Zanaya Wong as the unstable woman who had a public meltdown. Here's what even Amaya Bridges herself didn't see coming. That single slap, the one that destroyed Zanaya's reputation overnight, that turned her into a social pariah, that cost her clients and nearly ended her career. That same slap would ultimately expose secrets so explosive they would topple an empire. Because sometimes, the person who looks like the villain is actually the hero who just hasn't had their moment yet. This is the story of how one woman's worst mistake became her greatest triumph. How a moment of rage revealed years of hidden manipulation. How a public humiliation led to private justice that rocked the foundation of wealth and power in one of America's most elite circles. You're about to discover how Walter Webster's marriage was built on lies, how Amaya Bridges destroyed lives behind closed doors, and how Zanaya Wong went from being the most hated woman in San Francisco to being the one person brave enough to speak truth to power. But most importantly, you're about to learn how one split-second decision can change absolutely everything. Not just for the person who makes it, but for everyone whose lives they touch. So buckle up, because what happened next turned the scandal into something no one saw coming. How did one slap destroy a millionaire's marriage and expose the darkest secrets of San Francisco's elite? If you're ready for a story that will completely blow your mind, smash that like button and let me know in the comments. Have you ever witnessed a public confrontation that changed everything? Because trust me, by the end of the story, you'll never look at power, privilege, or courage the same way again. To understand how we got to that explosive moment, we need to rewind 3 hours earlier to when this story really began. Zanaya Wong stood in front of her bedroom mirror, adjusting her black cocktail dress for the 5th time. At 28, she had built her public relations firm from nothing, working 18-hour days and surviving on determination alone. Tonight represented everything she had worked toward, a chance to network with San Francisco's most influential power players. She had earned this invitation through pure hustle. Months of courting a high-profile client had finally paid off when they offered her a +1 to Walter Webster's annual charity gala. It was the golden ticket into a world that felt impossibly far from her modest Oakland apartment. Walter Webster owned half of Silicon Valley, or at least it seemed that way. His tech empire had made him one of California's youngest billionaires, and his annual charity events were legendary. Getting invited meant you mattered. Being excluded meant you didn't exist. The Webster estate sprawled across Pacific Heights like something out of a movie set. Manicured gardens led to a mansion that could house a small village. Valet attendants in crisp uniforms guided guests from their luxury vehicles while photographers captured every arrival for society pages. Inside, the grandeur was overwhelming. Marble floors gleamed under massive crystal chandeliers. A champagne fountain bubbled with Dom Perignon while waiters in white gloves carried silver trays of delicacies most people couldn't pronounce. The guest list read like a who's who of American influence. Tech moguls, entertainment executives, political figures, and social media royalty. This was Amaya Bridges' domain. Walter's wife commanded attention the moment she appeared. At 35, Amaya possessed the kind of refined beauty that money could perfect but couldn't buy. Her auburn hair was styled to perfection. Her emerald gown probably cost more than most people's cars, and her jewelry caught the light like captured starfire. But it wasn't just her appearance that made her formidable. Amaya had mastered the subtle art of social warfare. She could destroy reputations with a perfectly timed raised eyebrow or elevate unknowns to stardom with a single introduction. People fought for her approval and feared her displeasure in equal measure. She moved through the crowd like a conductor leading an invisible orchestra. Conversations shifted when she approached. Laughter became more careful. Even powerful men straightened their ties and checked their words around her. Zanaya watched this performance from across the room, nursing her first glass of champagne and trying not to look too obviously impressed. She had studied Amaya's social media presence religiously, knowing that one positive interaction could transform her business overnight. The contrast between them was stark. While Amaya glided effortlessly between conversations, dropping names and inside jokes that proved her insider status, Zanaya felt like she was wearing a sign that screamed, "Doesn't belong here." Her dress, though beautiful, came from a department store. Her shoes, while elegant, were borrowed from her sister. Her jewelry was vintage costume pieces that looked expensive under the right lighting but would never fool a trained eye. More importantly, she lacked the invisible language of the wealthy. The casual references to private jets and vacation homes, the effortless way they discussed business deals worth millions, the shared history of exclusive schools and family connections that created instant bonds. Every conversation felt like walking through a minefield. Should she mention her state school education? Her student loans? The fact that she had worked as a waitress to fund her business degree? Everything about her background felt like a liability in this golden bubble of privilege. Yet Zanaya was no pushover. She had built her company by outworking competitors who had every advantage she lacked. She had won clients by delivering results when others promised connections. She understood that success meant more than just money. It meant proving that merit could triumph over circumstances. As the evening progressed, she found herself growing bolder. She joined conversations, shared insights about market trends, and even made a few connections that could prove valuable. For brief moments, she forgot about the gap between her world and theirs. But Amaya Bridges was watching. The socialite had noticed this newcomer who didn't quite fit the mold. Zanaya's confidence, her refusal to shrink away from important discussions, her obvious intelligence, it all registered as a potential threat to someone who had spent years cultivating absolute social control. In Amaya's experience, people like Zanaya were dangerous. They brought unpredictability to carefully managed social ecosystems. They asked uncomfortable questions and challenged established hierarchies. Worst of all, they sometimes succeeded despite lacking the proper credentials. As the night wore on, the tension between these two worlds, old money privilege and new world ambition, began to build toward something neither woman could have anticipated. The stage was set for a collision that would expose just how fragile the foundations of power really were. The charity auction was in full swing when Zanaya decided to make her move. She had spent the first hour observing, learning the rhythm of conversations, identifying the key players who could change her professional trajectory forever. The cause tonight was childhood literacy, a safe, feel-good charity that allowed the wealthy to bid extravagant amounts on luxury items while feeling virtuous about their contributions. A weekend in Napa went for $50,000. A private dinner with a celebrity chef reached $75,000. The numbers being thrown around casually represented more money than Zanaya made in a year. She positioned herself near a cluster of venture capitalists discussing emerging markets. Their conversation was exactly the kind of intelligence her clients paid premium rates to access. As they debated the future of artificial intelligence investments, Zanaya found herself genuinely engaged, offering insights that made several of them turn to look at her with newfound interest. "You work in tech?" asked Marcus Chen, a partner at one of the city's most prestigious investment firms. "Public relations," Zanaya replied confidently. "I help innovative companies tell their stories in ways that matter." The conversation flowed naturally. Zanaya shared case studies of successful campaigns she had led, demonstrating her understanding of market psychology and brand positioning. For the first time all evening, she felt like she belonged in this room. Marcus handed her his business card. "We should talk. We're always looking for fresh perspectives on market communication." Other conversations followed. A biotech executive expressed interest in her crisis management experience. A software entrepreneur asked for her thoughts on reaching younger demographics. Each interaction built her confidence, proving that her expertise had value even in this rarefied atmosphere. As she moved through the crowd, Zanaya felt her professional instincts sharpening. She was reading the room expertly, timing her introductions perfectly, and building genuine connections rather than just exchanging pleasantries. The champagne fountain had become a natural gathering point, its bubbling display creating an elegant backdrop for the evening's most important conversations. Zanaya approached it to refill her glass, riding high on her networking successes. That's when she first crossed paths with Amaya Bridges. The collision was minor, barely a brush of shoulders as both women reached for fresh glasses. But Amaya's reaction was immediate and disproportionate. "Excuse me," Amaya said sharply, her voice carrying just enough volume to draw attention from nearby guests. "You're blocking the fountain." Zanaya looked around, confused. The fountain area was spacious, with plenty of room for multiple people. She had been standing to one side, certainly not blocking anyone's access. "I'm sorry, I didn't realize," Zanaya began, stepping aside politely. "Of course you didn't realize," Amaya interrupted, her tone dripping with condescension. "People like you never do." The comment hit like a physical blow. "People like you." The dismissal was so casual, so automatic, that it revealed everything about how Amaya viewed anyone who didn't belong to her exclusive circle. Zanaya felt heat rising in her chest. She had spent the entire evening proving her worth, demonstrating her intelligence, building legitimate professional relationships. And now this woman was reducing her to nothing more than an unwelcome intruder. "I beg your pardon," Zanaya replied, her voice steady but with an edge that warned of rising anger. Amaya stepped closer, her emerald gown rustling like armor. "You heard me perfectly. I've been watching you all evening, working the room like some kind of social climber. Do you honestly think these people don't see right through your little performance?" The accusation stung because it contained just enough truth to wound. Zanaya had been networking aggressively. She was trying to make connections that could advance her career. But what Amaya framed as manipulation, Zanaya saw as legitimate professional development. "I'm here as a guest," Zanaya said firmly. "I have every right to be here." "A guest," Amaya repeated mockingly. "A +1 who doesn't know her place. Let me help you understand something about how things work in our world. You don't just show up and start inserting yourself into conversations with serious people. You earn your way in through proper channels." Other guests were beginning to notice the exchange. Conversations nearby grew quieter as people strained to overhear what was becoming an increasingly heated confrontation. Zanaya felt the familiar burn of being underestimated, the same feeling that had driven her to work twice as hard as everyone else her entire life. "I've earned my place here through my work and my relationships. I don't need anyone's permission to participate in professional conversations." Amaya laughed, a cold, cutting sound that made several nearby guests wince. "Your work? Honey, you run a tiny PR firm that most people have never heard of. You're here because someone took pity on you, not because you belong." The words were designed to humiliate, to reduce Zanaya to nothing more than a charity case. But they also revealed something crucial about Amaya herself, her need to maintain rigid social hierarchies, her fear of anyone who might challenge the established order. "You know what I think," Amaya continued, stepping even closer, her voice dropping to a dangerous whisper that only Zanaya could hear clearly. "I think you're one of those desperate little girls who thinks rubbing shoulders with successful people will somehow make you successful too. But here's what you don't understand." She paused, her eyes scanning Zanaya from head to toe with obvious disdain. "You can put on a pretty dress and learn to hold a champagne glass properly, but you'll never actually be one of us. You don't have the breeding, the connections, or the instincts. And frankly, watching you try so hard tonight has been embarrassing for everyone involved." The attack was so personal, so calculated to destroy, that it took Zanaya's breath away. This wasn't just social snobbery. This was deliberate cruelty designed to crush her spirit and send her running back to where Amaya believed she belonged. Around them, the gala continued its elegant dance. The string quartet played Vivaldi while guests bid on art pieces worth more than houses. Crystal glasses clinked in celebration while champagne bubbles caught the light like tiny diamonds. The contrast between the beauty of the setting and the ugliness of Amaya's words created a surreal backdrop for what was about to unfold. Zanaya's hands began to shake, not from fear but from pure fury. Every slight she had ever endured, every time someone had looked right through her because of her background, every moment she had been made to feel less than worthy came flooding back. She thought about her immigrant parents who had sacrificed everything to give her opportunities. She thought about the scholarship she had earned through merit alone. She thought about the clients who trusted her with their biggest challenges because she delivered results, not because of her family name. "You have no idea who you're messing with," Amaya hissed, leaning in so close that Zanaya could smell her expensive perfume. The threat was clear. Amaya Bridges had the power to destroy careers with a phone call. She could blacklist people from events, poison professional relationships, and make entire industries unwelcoming to anyone who dared cross her. Can you feel the tension building? Drop a fire in the comments if you've ever been in a situation where someone pushed you too far. In that moment, Zanaya faced a choice that would define not just her evening, but her entire future. She could apologize, back down, and accept the humiliation. She could retreat to the safety of knowing her place and never challenging the established order again. Or she could do something that would shock everyone in that room, including herself. The champagne fountain continued its elegant display, oblivious to the storm about to break. Guests laughed and celebrated around them, unaware that they were about to witness a moment that would become San Francisco's social media legend. Zanaya Wong raised her hand. Time seemed to slow as Zanaya's palm connected with Amaya's cheek. The sound was crisp and definitive, a sound that would replay in hundreds of social media videos within hours. Amaya's head snapped to the side, her perfectly styled hair falling across her face. For 3 full seconds, she didn't move, didn't speak, didn't even seem to breathe. Her hand slowly rose to touch the red mark blooming across her cheek, her emerald eyes wide with absolute disbelief. No one had ever struck Amaya Bridges. Ever. The immediate aftermath was pure pandemonium disguised as frozen shock. A waiter dropped his tray, sending crystal glasses crashing to the marble floor. A tech executive choked on his champagne. Someone's phone clattered to the ground as they fumbled to start recording. The first gasp came from a socialite near the fountain. Then another. Then a collective intake of breath that seemed to suck all the oxygen from the room. "Oh my God," someone whispered. "Did she just—" "Holy shit," came another voice, barely audible but somehow carrying across the suddenly silent space. Zanaya stood frozen, her hand still raised, staring at what she had just done. The anger that had driven her to act was already fading, replaced by a cold realization of the magnitude of her action. She had just publicly humiliated the most powerful woman in San Francisco's social elite. Amaya finally found her voice, though it came out as a strangled whisper. You actually hit me." Zanaya began, but before she could form a complete sentence, the room exploded into motion. Walter Webster pushed through the crowd, his face a mask of controlled fury. At 42, he commanded respect through quiet authority rather than dramatic displays, but seeing his wife struck in public triggered something primal in him. "What the hell is wrong with you?" he demanded, positioning himself protectively in front of Amaya. "Who do you think you are?" Security materialized from the crowd's edges. 2 large men in dark suits who had been discreetly monitoring the event. They moved with professional efficiency, flanking Zanaya without touching her but making their presence unmistakably clear. "Ma'am, you need to come with us," the lead security officer said firmly. "Now." The crowd began forming a circle around the scene, some guests pulling out phones to capture the drama while others backed away as if the conflict might be contagious. The elegant gala had transformed into something resembling a street fight's aftermath. Amaya leaned into her husband's protective embrace, her shock giving way to perfectly performed devastation. Tears, whether real or calculated, began forming in her eyes. I can't believe someone would do this. At a charity event. In front of all these people. Her voice carried just the right note of wounded dignity that immediately cast her as the sympathetic victim. Several guests rushed to offer comfort and support, their horrified expressions confirming that Zanaya had committed the ultimate social sin. "Get her out of here," Walter commanded the security team, his voice loud enough for the gathering crowd to hear. "And make sure she never gets invited to anything in this city again." As the security guards began escorting Zanaya toward the exit, phones emerged from evening bags and suit jacket pockets. The distinctive sound of camera shutters and video recording filled the air. Social media was about to explode. "This is insane," Zanaya heard someone say as she was guided through the crowd. "Who even is she?" "I heard she's some nobody PR girl," came another voice. "Can you believe the audacity?" The walk to the exit felt like a death march. Every step took her past faces she had been networking with just minutes earlier. Faces now filled with disgust, shock, and voyeuristic fascination. The venture capitalist who had given her his business card looked away entirely. The biotech executive shook his head in disappointment. By the time they reached the mansion's grand entrance, at least 20 phones were recording her exit. The valet attendant stared openly as security escorted her past the luxury vehicles and perfectly manicured gardens that had seemed so welcoming just hours before. "Your vehicle?" the security officer asked curtly. I took an Uber," Zanaya admitted, the reality of her situation hitting her fully. She would have to wait on the street corner for a ride while reporters and social media influencers captured her humiliation. Back inside the mansion, the drama continued without her. Amaya had recovered enough to accept the sympathy and outrage being offered by dozens of concerned guests. She held court near the champagne fountain, the very spot where her social reign had been challenged, accepting condolences as if she were grieving a death rather than nursing a red cheek. "I've never experienced anything so shocking," she told the gathering crowd. "To be attacked like that, completely unprovoked, at a charity event of all places. What kind of person does something like that?" Walter stood beside her, his arm around her shoulders, playing the protective husband role to perfection. But several guests noticed something interesting. While he comforted his wife publicly, his eyes kept drifting toward the exit where Zanaya had disappeared. The first social media post went live before Zanaya's Uber even arrived. A grainy video of the slap, taken from across the room, was uploaded to Instagram with the caption, "Crazy woman attacks millionaire's wife at charity gala." Within minutes, the video had hundreds of views. Within an hour, it would have thousands. By morning, it would be everywhere. Text messages began flooding in immediately. The guests who had witnessed the incident started sharing their versions of events, each retelling slightly more dramatic than the last. Group chats exploded with speculation about who Zanaya was and what could have possibly motivated such an outrageous act. "Did you see her face after she did it?" One text read. "She looked as shocked as everyone else." "Amaya handled it perfectly though," came another message. "So dignified under attack." As Zanaya finally climbed into her rideshare vehicle, her phone was already buzzing with notifications. Unknown numbers were calling. Her social media accounts were being tagged in videos she hadn't even seen yet. Her professional email was filling with messages she was afraid to open. The driver glanced at her in the rearview mirror. Rough night. Zanaya stared out the window at the retreating lights of the Webster estate, where the party continued without her, where her reputation was being destroyed one conversation at a time. "You could say that," she whispered. She had no idea that in less than 24 hours, her name would be trending nationwide. She couldn't have imagined that the slap heard around San Francisco was just the beginning of a story that would expose secrets far more shocking than anything that had happened at the gala. As her Uber wound through the city streets toward her modest apartment, Zanaya Wong began the longest night of her life, not knowing that her biggest mistake was about to become her greatest opportunity. Zanaya's phone started ringing at 6:47 a.m. She had barely slept, replaying the events at the gala over and over in her mind. Each time she closed her eyes, she saw Amaya's shocked face, heard the collective gasp of the crowd, felt the weight of hundreds of judging stares. The first call was from a reporter at the San Francisco Chronicle, then Channel 7 News, then 3 different gossip blogs. By 7 a.m., her voicemail was full and her phone had crashed from the volume of notifications. When she finally managed to open her social media accounts, the devastation was complete. The hashtag #GalaSlap was trending nationally. The grainy video from the party had been shared over 50,000 times across different platforms. But worse than the video itself were the comments. Thousands of them, each more vicious than the last. "Who does this psycho think she is? Attacking someone at a charity event? Disgusting. Hope she gets arrested for assault. This is what happens when you let random people into high society events." Someone had already identified her business, and her company's reviews were being bombed with 1-star ratings from people who had never used her services. Her professional headshots had been turned into memes mocking her appearance and background. The headlines were even worse. PR professional loses control. Slaps tech mogul's wife at charity gala. Shocking. Unknown woman attacks beloved socialite Amaya Bridges. Social climber's meltdown goes viral after elite event attack. Every article painted the same picture. Zanaya as an unstable outsider who had violently attacked an innocent woman for no apparent reason. None mentioned the verbal assault that had preceded the physical one. None questioned why someone would risk everything over a simple misunderstanding. Her first client called at 8:30 a.m. "Zanaya, I'm sorry, but we need to discuss our contract," said David Rodriguez, CEO of a promising fintech startup. "This situation, it's not the kind of publicity we can be associated with right now." The conversation was polite but final. They would be terminating their agreement effective immediately, citing the morality clause in their contract, the same clause that existed in every contract she had signed. The second call came 20 minutes later. Then the third. By noon, Zanaya had lost 4 clients representing 60% of her annual revenue. Meanwhile, Amaya Bridges was masterfully playing the role of gracious victim across every media platform. She appeared on the local morning show looking perfectly composed, a small bandage on her cheek the only visible reminder of the previous night's events. "I've never experienced anything like it," Amaya told the sympathetic host, her voice trembling with just the right amount of vulnerability. To be physically attacked at an event celebrating children's literacy. It's heartbreaking. I keep asking myself what I could have done differently. The interview was a masterclass in public relations. Amaya never directly attacked Zanaya's character, instead expressing concern for her mental health and hoping she would get the help she clearly needed. The approach was devastatingly effective. It positioned Amaya as not just a victim, but a compassionate one. Walter appeared briefly in the segment, his arm around his wife's shoulders, describing the incident as completely unprovoked and praising Amaya's grace under pressure. Their united front looked unshakable. Social media rallied around Team Amaya with shocking speed. Hashtag Justice for Amaya began trending alongside hashtag GalaSlap. Influencers who had never met either woman created content supporting the innocent victim and condemning violent behavior from desperate wannabes. A particularly brutal TikTok compilation showed clips of Zanaya's business promotional videos alongside footage of the slap, set to dramatic music with text overlay reading, "When PR professionals need PR help themselves." The video received 2 million views in 18 hours. Zanaya's remaining clients began distancing themselves. Emails that should have contained project updates instead carried requests for timeline adjustments and budget reassessments. The message was clear without being explicit. They were looking for exits. Her landlord called about the news coverage affecting the building's reputation. Her gym membership was quietly canceled. The coffee shop where she held client meetings suddenly couldn't accommodate her usual reservations. The isolation was suffocating. Friends stopped answering her calls, afraid of being associated with the scandal. Her business partner suggested she take a temporary leave of absence until things cooled down. Former colleagues avoided her like she carried something contagious. But the cruelest blow came from her own industry. The Public Relations Society of San Francisco released a statement condemning unprofessional behavior that reflects poorly on our entire field. They launched an ethics investigation into her membership status, effectively signaling to every potential client that she was radioactive. 3 days after the gala, Zanaya sat in her apartment surrounded by newspaper clippings and printouts of social media posts, all telling the same story. She was the villain in this narrative, and there was no redemption arc coming. Her savings account, already stretched thin from building her business, couldn't sustain the loss of income for more than a few weeks. The legal fees from the potential assault charges Amaya was considering would finish what the public relations disaster had started. The darkest moment came when she opened her laptop to find an email from her biggest potential client, a contract worth more than her entire previous year's income. The subject line read simply, "Contract withdrawal. Due to recent events and their potential impact on our brand reputation, we will be pursuing other public relations options. We wish you the best in your future endeavors." Future endeavors. As if she had any left. Zanaya closed the laptop and stared at her reflection in the black screen. 28 years old, and her career was effectively over. Not because she lacked talent or dedication, but because she had dared to stand up to someone who wielded power like a weapon. The media narrative had crystallized into something unshakable. Amaya Bridges was the elegant victim of an unprovoked attack. Zanaya Wong was the unstable aggressor who had violated the sacred rules of civilized society. Case closed. But what nobody knew, what the cameras hadn't captured and the witnesses hadn't reported, was the conversation that had led to the slap. Amaya's calculated cruelty, her deliberate attempt to humiliate and destroy, had been conveniently forgotten in favor of a simpler story about violence and victimhood. The truth didn't matter when it competed with a narrative that the public wanted to believe. As the sun set on her 4th day as San Francisco's most notorious social pariah, Zanaya considered her options. She could issue a public apology, admit fault, and hope for eventual forgiveness. She could leave the city entirely, start over somewhere no one knew her name. She could fight the assault charges and probably lose, adding legal defeat to professional destruction. Or she could accept that her life as she knew it was over. She had built everything from nothing once before. She could do it again. Maybe. In a different city. Under a different name. After enough time had passed for people to forget. The apartment felt smaller each day, the walls closing in as her world contracted to the size of her shame. Former colleagues crossed the street to avoid her. Her professional network had evaporated overnight. Even ordering food delivery felt risky. Would the drivers recognize her from the viral videos? This is where most people would give up. But if you believe in fighting back against injustice, hit that subscribe button because this story is about to take the most incredible turn. On the fifth morning after the gala, as Zanaya sat drinking coffee and scrolling through job listings in distant cities, her phone rang with an unknown number. The voice on the other end would change everything. Zanaya Wong? This is Kensley Hodges. I think we need to talk. What happened to you at that gala? It wasn't random. And Amaya Bridges isn't the victim she's pretending to be. The caller paused, letting the words sink in. If you're willing to fight back, I can help you expose the truth. But you need to know, what we discover might be bigger than anything you could imagine. For the first time in 5 days, Zanaya felt something other than despair. Hope. Kensley Hodges didn't sound like the typical vultures who had been circling Zanaya's story for days. Her voice carried authority without aggression, intelligence without manipulation. When she suggested they meet in person, Zanaya found herself agreeing despite every instinct telling her to trust no one. They met at a small cafe in the Mission District, far from the social circles where Zanaya had become infamous. Kensley arrived first, a woman in her early 40s with silver-streaked hair and the kind of sharp eyes that missed nothing. She had been an investigative journalist for 15 years before transitioning into crisis management, specializing in cases where the public narrative didn't match the private reality. You're probably wondering why I called, Kensley said as Zanaya sat down across from her. The truth is, I've been watching Amaya Bridges for 3 years, waiting for someone brave enough to challenge her publicly. Zanaya nearly laughed. Brave? I destroyed my career in 5 seconds of stupidity. Did you? Kensley pulled out a tablet and showed Zanaya a series of articles spanning the past decade. Look at these stories. Really look at them. The headlines told a pattern Zanaya hadn't noticed before. Rising tech executive leaves Webster Industries after personal differences. Former Webster VP starts competing firm. Cites toxic work environment. Charity board member resigns following disagreement with leadership. Each article was brief, professional, and mentioned no specific details about the departures. But when viewed together, they painted a troubling picture of talented people suddenly leaving Walter Webster's orbit after years of success. 37 high-level departures in 8 years, Kensley explained. All described as mutual decisions or personal choices. All involving people who had somehow crossed Amaya Bridges. She showed Zanaya another screen. Social media profiles of former Webster Industries employees. Many had stopped posting entirely after leaving the company. Others had moved to different cities, different industries, different lives entirely. I started tracking this pattern after covering a story about Marcus Thompson, Walter's former chief technology officer. Brilliant man, revolutionary ideas, destined for greatness. Then suddenly he's gone. No explanation. No farewell announcement. Just erased. Kensley's investigation had revealed that Marcus had questioned Amaya's involvement in company decisions during a board meeting. Within 6 months, he was out, his reputation quietly destroyed through whisper campaigns about his reliability and judgment. The beauty of Amaya's method is its subtlety, Kensley continued. She never attacks directly. Instead, she plants seeds of doubt, questions someone's stability, suggests they might be having personal problems, wonders aloud about their decision-making under pressure. The picture emerging was of a woman who had perfected the art of character assassination while maintaining complete plausible deniability. Amaya never left fingerprints on the destruction she caused. But your slap changed everything, Kensley said, leaning forward with intensity. For the first time, someone challenged her publicly. And her reaction. It was too perfect, too practiced, like she had been preparing for this moment her entire life. Zanaya studied the tablet screen, seeing connections she had missed. You think she planned the confrontation? I think Amaya Bridges saw you networking successfully and decided you were a threat. I think she approached that champagne fountain specifically to neutralize you before you could form any meaningful relationships. The revelation hit Zanaya like a physical blow. The encounter hadn't been random. The escalating confrontation hadn't been accidental. She had been deliberately triggered into a response that would destroy her credibility and remove her from the social landscape entirely. Why are you telling me this? Zanaya asked. Because I've been waiting for someone who had nothing left to lose, Kensley replied bluntly. Everyone else who crosses Amaya still has careers to protect, reputations to preserve. They make calculated decisions to cut their losses and disappear quietly. She gestured toward the news articles still playing on the cafe's television screen. Coverage of Amaya's latest charitable appearance, looking radiant and recovered from her traumatic experience. But you've already lost everything, which means you're the only person in San Francisco who can afford to tell the truth about what she really is. The proposition was both thrilling and terrifying. Kensley had resources, connections, and investigative experience that could potentially expose Amaya's hidden manipulations. But it would mean going to war with the most powerful woman in the city's social elite. What exactly are you proposing? Zanaya asked. A full investigation into Amaya's business practices and personal conduct, financial records, employment patterns, witness interviews. Everything we need to show that your slap wasn't random violence. It was a natural response to systematic psychological abuse. Kensley opened another file on her tablet. I've already identified 12 former Webster Industries employees willing to speak off the record about Amaya's interference in company operations. 2 former friends who witnessed her destroying other people's relationships out of jealousy. 1 ex-business partner who has documentation of her sabotaging deals she couldn't control. The evidence was substantial but needed someone willing to be the public face of the accusations. Someone whose story would give context to the pattern of destruction Amaya had been causing for years. If we do this, Kensley warned, it gets worse before it gets better. Amaya will fight back with everything she has. The media attention will intensify. You'll become the center of an even bigger storm. Zanaya thought about her empty office, her canceled contracts, her ruined reputation. She thought about all the talented people who had been quietly destroyed by Amaya's manipulations, forced to rebuild their lives after crossing someone who treated other human beings like chess pieces. She thought about the look in Amaya's eyes during their confrontation. Not just anger or irritation, but genuine pleasure at the prospect of crushing someone beneath her social power. "What's the timeline?" Zanaya asked. 2 weeks to gather everything we need. Another week to verify sources and build an airtight case. Then we release it all at once. A comprehensive exposé that tells the real story behind San Francisco's sweetest socialite. For the first time since the gala, Zanaya felt her strategic mind engaging. This wasn't just about clearing her name anymore. It was about protecting future victims from the same systematic destruction she had experienced. "There's something else," Kensley added quietly. "Walter Webster himself. My sources suggest he's been growing increasingly uncomfortable with his wife's behavior. The marriage isn't the fairy tale it appears to be." She showed Zanaya a series of photos from recent public events. In each one, Walter's smile looked increasingly forced. His body language around Amaya had grown distant, protective gestures replaced by formal positioning. "Men like Walter don't stay married to women like Amaya unless they feel trapped," Kensley observed. "Power, social expectations, business connections. There are many kinds of prisons that look like palaces from the outside." The possibility that Walter himself might be a victim of Amaya's manipulations added another layer to the story. It suggested that the slap might have done more than just shock the social elite. It might have been the crack that could bring down an entire facade of lies. "I'm in," Zanaya said, surprising herself with the firmness in her voice. "But I have one condition. When we expose the truth, we do it right. No half measures, no calculated leaks. We tell the complete story and let people decide for themselves." Kensley smiled for the first time since they had met. "I was hoping you'd say that." As they shook hands across the small cafe table, Zanaya felt something she hadn't experienced since the night of the gala. Purpose. She was no longer just a victim of circumstances beyond her control. She was about to become the catalyst for exposing a truth that had been hidden for far too long. The game was about to change completely. The investigation that followed would have impressed seasoned detectives. Kensley's network of sources ran deeper than Zanaya had imagined, reaching into boardrooms, law firms, and social circles that had been documenting Amaya's behavior for years. The first breakthrough came from Rebecca Martinez, Walter's former head of marketing who had left the company abruptly in 2019. Over coffee in a quiet Berkeley restaurant, Rebecca revealed the true reason for her departure. "I was presenting our quarterly social media strategy to the board," Rebecca explained, her hands trembling slightly as she recalled the memory. Amaya wasn't officially part of the meeting, but she attended as Walter's wife. When I suggested partnering with several female entrepreneurs for our diversity campaign, Amaya interrupted. The interruption hadn't been public or dramatic. Instead, Amaya had quietly questioned Rebecca's judgment, suggesting that the proposed partnerships might reflect poorly on the company's brand standards. She raised concerns about the entrepreneurs' backgrounds, their education levels, their social media presence. "It was death by 1,000 small cuts," Rebecca continued. "Every suggestion I made was met with polite skepticism. Every campaign I proposed was deemed risky or potentially problematic. Within 3 months, my entire department was questioning my leadership." The pattern was devastatingly effective. Amaya never directly criticized or confronted. She simply raised questions that planted seeds of doubt until Rebecca's own team began undermining her authority. But Rebecca's story was just the beginning. James Morrison, Walter's former chief financial officer, revealed how Amaya had systematically blocked business deals with companies led by women she perceived as threats. During executive meetings, She would voice concerns about these companies' stability or question their leaders' personal lives, effectively poisoning potential partnerships before they could develop. She had dossiers, James revealed during a secure phone call. Actual files containing personal information about female executives, entrepreneurs, and socialites. Details about their marriages, their financial situations, their family problems. Information she used to strategically destroy relationships and business opportunities. The revelation was staggering. Amaya had been running what amounted to an intelligence operation, gathering ammunition to use against anyone who might challenge her position or threaten her control over Walter's empire. Kensley's investigation revealed financial irregularities that went far beyond social manipulation. Bank records showed that Amaya had been secretly funneling company funds through her personal charity foundation, the same charity that had hosted the gala where Zanaya had snapped. The foundation claimed to support childhood literacy, but detailed analysis of its spending showed that less than 30% of donations actually reached educational programs. The rest disappeared into administrative costs, consulting fees to companies Amaya controlled, and lavish fundraising events that functioned more like personal entertainment expenses. But the most explosive discovery came from Walter's personal assistant, who had documented years of disturbing behavior behind closed doors. Linda Chen had worked for Walter for 6 years, managing his schedule and handling his private communications. What she witnessed daily contradicted everything the public believed about the Webster marriage. Walter was afraid of her, Linda revealed during a clandestine meeting in Golden Gate Park. Not physically afraid, but psychologically terrorized. She monitored his phone calls, read his emails, questioned every business decision. If he disagreed with her publicly, she would punish him privately through emotional warfare that could last for weeks. Linda described episodes where Amaya would give Walter the silent treatment for days, refusing to speak to him or appear at public events together until he apologized for whatever perceived slight had triggered her rage. She controlled his social calendar, his charitable giving, even his relationships with family members. He tried to have lunch with his own brother last year, Linda continued. Amaya found out and accused him of plotting against her, claiming his family had never accepted her. She made his life so miserable that he canceled the lunch and hasn't spoken to his brother since. The marriage that looked perfect in magazine spreads was actually a carefully maintained prison where Walter's every move was monitored and controlled by a woman who viewed his success as her personal property. Financial documents revealed the true extent of Amaya's control. She had gradually inserted herself into every aspect of Walter's business operations, claiming spousal privilege to access confidential information that she then used to manipulate personnel decisions and strategic planning. When Walter's company was considering a merger with a firm led by a highly successful female CEO, internal emails showed that Amaya had conducted an extensive background investigation into the woman's personal life, searching for any scandal or weakness that could be used to torpedo the deal. The merger never happened. The female CEO later told colleagues that she had received anonymous tips suggesting that Webster Industries was investigating her company for potential fraud, tips that created enough uncertainty to kill the partnership. But perhaps the most disturbing evidence came from social media monitoring software that Kensley had used to track online conversations about Amaya's victims. The results showed coordinated campaigns designed to destroy reputations through strategic trolling and false information. When Rebecca Martinez had tried to start her own marketing firm after leaving Webster Industries, her new company's social media accounts were flooded with fake reviews claiming unprofessional behavior and failed campaigns. The reviews appeared to come from different users, but analysis revealed they originated from a small network of accounts that posted only negative content about Amaya's former targets. She was weaponizing the internet to finish what she started in boardrooms, Kensley explained. Systematic character assassination designed to ensure her victims could never recover professionally. As the evidence mounted, Zanaya felt her perspective shifting entirely. Her slap hadn't been an isolated moment of violence. It had been the natural response to encountering a predator who had been destroying lives for nearly a decade. The investigation also revealed why Amaya had targeted Zanaya so aggressively at the gala. Security footage from the event showed Amaya watching Zanaya's networking conversations throughout the evening, her expression growing increasingly hostile as Zanaya made genuine connections with influential guests. "She saw you succeeding on merit alone," Kensley observed. "No family connections, no inherited wealth, just pure competence and determination." That terrified her because it proved her entire worldview wrong. Amaya's power depended on maintaining the illusion that success in elite circles required the right breeding and connections. Zanaya's presence challenged that fundamental assumption, suggesting that outsiders could earn their place through talent and hard work. The confrontation at the champagne fountain hadn't been spontaneous. It had been a calculated move to eliminate a threat before it could fully develop. As they compiled their evidence, Zansley and Kensley developed a strategy that would expose not just Amaya's individual crimes, but the entire system of social manipulation she had created. They would release a comprehensive report documenting her pattern of behavior, supported by testimony from victims, financial records, and digital evidence of her smear campaigns. But they needed one final piece: direct proof of Amaya's methods from someone who had witnessed them firsthand. That proof came from an unexpected source: Walter's own private investigator. 3 years earlier, Walter had hired David Kim to investigate suspected corporate espionage within his company. What David discovered was that the leak was coming from inside his own home. Amaya had been sharing confidential business information with competitors, using Walter's secrets as currency in her own power games. "Walter buried my report," David told them during a late-night meeting. "But I kept copies of everything. Financial transfers, recorded phone conversations, documented meetings. Enough evidence to prove that Amaya Bridges has been systematically betraying her own husband for years." The final piece of the puzzle fell into place. Amaya hadn't just been destroying other people's careers and relationships. She had been sabotaging Walter's business from within, trading his company's secrets for personal advantage in social and financial circles. Armed with this evidence, Zanaya felt a transformation she couldn't have imagined a week earlier. The victim mentality that had consumed her since the gala was replaced by something far more powerful: righteous determination. She wasn't just fighting to clear her name anymore. She was fighting to expose a truth that could protect countless future victims from the same systematic destruction she had experienced. "When do we release everything?" Zanaya asked, her voice steady with newfound purpose. "Tomorrow morning," Kensley replied. "We hit every major news outlet simultaneously: print, television, digital, social media. By the time Amaya wakes up, the entire narrative will have changed." For the first time since the night of the gala, Zanaya Wong smiled. The woman who had been destroyed by one slap was about to deliver a revelation that would shake the foundation of San Francisco's social elite. The outsider who had been dismissed and humiliated was about to prove that sometimes the most powerful weapon against corruption is simply refusing to stay silent. As she left the cafe that night, Zanaya felt the weight of her destroyed career lifting, replaced by something infinitely more valuable: the knowledge that her mistake was about to become her mission. The truth was coming, and it was going to change everything. The expose hit San Francisco like a digital earthquake at 6 a.m. on a Tuesday morning. Within hours, every major news outlet was running the story. The San Francisco Chronicle's headline read, "The Woman Behind the Curtain: How Amaya Bridges Built an Empire of Manipulation." CNN picked up the national angle: tech mogul's wife accused of decade-long campaign of psychological warfare. But it was the financial evidence that made the story impossible to dismiss. Bank records, charity foundation documents, and corporate communications painted an undeniable picture of systematic fraud and manipulation that went far beyond social drama. Amaya's perfectly crafted public image crumbled in real time. By 9 a.m., #AmayaExposed was trending globally. The same social media platforms that had destroyed Zanaya's reputation just weeks earlier were now flooded with revelations from other victims sharing their stories. Women who had been silenced for years suddenly found their voices, detailing encounters with Amaya that followed identical patterns of psychological manipulation. The charity foundation was suspended pending investigation. 3 major companies announced they were reviewing their partnerships with Webster Industries. The society pages that had celebrated Amaya as San Francisco's golden socialite were now dissecting every public appearance for signs of the darkness they had missed. But the moment that changed everything came at 2 p.m., when Walter Webster called an emergency press conference. He stood alone behind a podium at his company's headquarters, looking exhausted but resolute. The absence of his wife spoke volumes before he said a single word. "For too long I have allowed fear and misplaced loyalty to silence my voice," Walter began, his words measured but carrying unmistakable weight. "Today I am announcing my intention to file for divorce from Amaya Bridges Webster, effective immediately." The press room erupted. Reporters shouted questions while cameras flashed, but Walter continued speaking with the calm of a man who had finally found his freedom. "I want to address the incident at our recent charity gala that has dominated recent headlines. Zanaya Wong's actions that night have been characterized as unprovoked violence. I now know that characterization was false." He paused, meeting the cameras directly. What Ms. Wong experienced that evening was the same systematic psychological abuse that I and countless others have endured for years. Her response was not violence, it was courage. The courage to finally say enough when someone with power uses that power to destroy rather than build. The vindication was complete and public. Walter Webster, one of the most powerful men in Silicon Valley, had just credited Zanaya's slap as an act of bravery rather than aggression. "I have spent the past weeks reviewing evidence of behavior that I can no longer ignore or excuse. Financial impropriety, professional sabotage, and personal manipulation that has caused immeasurable harm to talented individuals whose only crime was threatening my wife's sense of absolute control." The press conference lasted 20 minutes, during which Walter systematically dismantled every element of Amaya's public persona. He revealed her interference in business decisions, her campaigns against female executives, and her use of charitable organizations for personal gain. Most powerfully, he spoke about the psychological toll of living under constant surveillance and control, describing a marriage that had become a prison where his every action was monitored and his every relationship was managed. Public opinion flipped with stunning speed. The same social media accounts that had vilified Zanaya now praised her courage. Memes celebrating her power slap replaced the mocking content from just days before. #Zanaya was right became a rallying cry for anyone who had ever been dismissed or underestimated. Meanwhile, Amaya's world collapsed with devastating finality. The FBI announced an investigation into the charity foundation's financial practices. The California Attorney General's office opened an inquiry into potential racketeering charges related to her systematic campaigns against business competitors. Former friends and allies distanced themselves as quickly as they had once sought her approval. Her social media accounts, once platforms for displaying her perfect life, became graveyards of deleted posts and disabled comments as the evidence against her mounted. The photographers who had documented her every charitable appearance now captured her fleeing from court hearings and legal depositions. But perhaps the most symbolic moment came when the Webster estate, the same mansion where Zanaya had been humiliated, was put up for sale. Amaya's domain, her palace of power and influence, became just another real estate listing. For Zanaya, the transformation was equally dramatic but infinitely more positive. Speaking requests flooded in from organizations wanting to hear her story, not as a cautionary tale about public meltdowns, but as an inspiring example of standing up to systemic abuse. Universities invited her to speak about power dynamics and courage. Women's leadership conferences wanted her insights on challenging authority. Her business began rebuilding, but with a different focus. Instead of traditional public relations, Zanaya became a crisis consultant for individuals facing coordinated harassment campaigns. Her experience surviving Amaya's manipulation tactics made her uniquely qualified to help others navigate similar attacks. The clients who had abandoned her during the scandal quietly reached out, hoping to restore their relationships. Many she declined. Her experience had taught her to value partnerships based on mutual respect rather than mere convenience. 6 months after the gala, Zanaya stood on a stage at the Women's Leadership Summit in Los Angeles, addressing an audience of over 3,000 entrepreneurs and executives. "I want to talk about the moment that changed my life," she began, her voice carrying across the auditorium with newfound confidence. "The moment I stopped being polite to someone who was systematically trying to destroy me." The audience was silent, hanging on every word. We're taught that good people don't make scenes, don't raise their voices, don't fight back when authority figures try to diminish us. We're taught that if we just stay quiet and work twice as hard, we'll eventually be accepted into spaces where we're not wanted. She paused, looking out at faces that reflected her own journey from outsider to advocate. But sometimes the most important thing you can do is refuse to be quiet. Sometimes, making a scene is exactly what the world needs to see. The standing ovation lasted for 5 minutes. Walter Webster attended that speech, sitting quietly in the back row. During the reception afterward, he approached Zanaya for the first time since the night everything changed. "Thank you," he said simply, "for having the courage I couldn't find." "Thank you," Zanaya replied, "for finally using your voice when it mattered most." As they shook hands, both understood that the slap heard around San Francisco had become something much more significant. The moment when truth finally triumphed over power, and courage proved more valuable than perfect manners. The woman who had lost everything in 5 seconds had gained something infinitely more precious. The knowledge that sometimes your biggest mistake becomes your greatest strength. Today, 3 years after that life-changing slap, Zanaya Wong runs one of the most successful crisis management firms on the West Coast. Her client list includes Fortune 500 executives, entertainment industry professionals, and entrepreneurs who need someone who truly understands what it means to survive a coordinated destruction campaign. Her story has become required reading in business schools studying power dynamics and ethical leadership. She's been featured on major news programs, written a best-selling memoir, and established a foundation that provides legal support for individuals facing systematic harassment campaigns. But perhaps most importantly, she's found peace with the moment that changed everything. The rage that consumed her at the champagne fountain has transformed into purposeful action that protects others from experiencing the same systematic abuse. Walter Webster chose a different path to healing. After his divorce was finalized, he stepped back from public appearances entirely, focusing on rebuilding his company's culture and repairing relationships that Amaya had damaged. He's never given another interview about the events that night, preferring to let his actions speak through the changes he's implemented. His company now has one of the strongest anti-harassment policies in Silicon Valley, with independent oversight ensuring that personal vendettas can never again masquerade as business decisions. Former employees who were forced out during Amaya's reign of influence have been quietly rehired or offered consulting positions. Walter found love again 2 years later with Dr. Sarah Chen, a pediatric surgeon who knew nothing about his social status when they met at a medical charity event. Their relationship is notably private, built on mutual respect rather than public performance. As for Amaya Bridges, justice took many forms. The FBI investigation resulted in federal fraud charges related to her charity foundation's financial irregularities. She ultimately pleaded guilty to wire fraud and tax evasion, receiving a sentence of 18 months in federal prison and ordered to pay $2.3 million in restitution. But the legal consequences were minor compared to the social exile that followed. The woman who had once controlled San Francisco's elite circles found herself completely abandoned by the community she had ruled through fear. Former friends refused to take her calls. Social events that had once revolved around her approval now actively excluded her presence. She now lives quietly in a modest apartment in Sacramento, working as an administrative assistant for a small nonprofit, a stark contrast to the mansion and staff that had once supported her lifestyle of manipulation and control. The broader lessons from this story extend far beyond one evening's drama at a charity gala. First, sometimes breaking silence requires breaking rules. Zanaya's slap was wrong by every conventional standard of social behavior. But it was also the moment when years of systematic abuse finally faced consequences. Sometimes the most important thing you can do is refuse to be polite to people who are trying to destroy you. Second, truth has a way of surfacing when we least expect it. Amaya's carefully constructed image seemed unshakable until the right person decided to challenge it. The evidence of her manipulation had always been there, waiting for someone brave enough to compile it and present it publicly. Third, courage isn't about being fearless. It's about acting despite fear. Zanaya was terrified of the consequences when she decided to join Kensley's investigation. She knew it would make her situation worse before it got better. But she acted anyway, because she understood that some fights are worth having even when the odds seem impossible. Finally, power built on manipulation is ultimately fragile. Amaya's influence seemed absolute because it was based on fear and control rather than genuine respect or shared values. Once people understood her methods, her power evaporated almost instantly. Authentic leadership survives challenges because it's built on trust rather than intimidation. The story of that night teaches us that our worst moments don't have to define our future. Sometimes, the mistakes that feel most catastrophic become the catalysts for the most important changes in our lives. Zanaya's slap lasted 5 seconds, but its impact continues to ripple outward, protecting others from predators who use social power as a weapon. What seemed like career suicide became career transformation. What looked like personal failure became public service. Her journey reminds us that standing up to bullies, even powerful, sophisticated bullies, is always worth the risk. That truth-telling, no matter how uncomfortable, serves a purpose larger than individual comfort. That courage can emerge in the most unlikely moments, changing not just our own lives but the lives of people we'll never meet. Most importantly, Zanaya's story proves that sometimes our biggest mistakes lead to our greatest victories. What's a moment in your life that seemed like a disaster but led to something amazing? Share your story in the comments below, and don't forget to subscribe for more incredible true stories that will change how you see the world. Because in the end, the most powerful lesson from that night in San Francisco is this: when faced with systematic injustice, sometimes the most radical thing you can do is simply refuse to stay quiet, even if it costs you everything. Especially if it costs you everything. Because some truths are worth the price.